Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have September road trips, knitting events, and quite a few knitting surprises. So let's get started. It is October, and it's finally sweater weather. We had a super hot and dry September. I think it was the hottest, driest one on record. It was like summertime all the way up literally until September 30th, and then a switch has flipped. And now it's fall, and it's time to wear sweaters. In September, I think we saw every extended family member pretty much that we have, except maybe my husband's cousins. Like that maybe would be it. When we got married in 1993, it will be our anniversary in just a few days, we had 7 living parents and step-parents between the two of us. So we were both children of divorce, and most of our parents had remarried. Up until January of 2021, they were all still alive. The oldest one at the time, I think, was 93 or 4. We lost 2 in 2021, my father-in-law and his wife. In 2022, my mother died. In 2023, just a year ago, my father died. And then at Thanksgiving, a couple months later, his wife died. And then this summer, my mom's husband died. So we are down to 1 parent. And that was the first road trip we took. My girls were both in town over Labor Day weekend, and one of them, my younger one, Sophia, lives in Chicago, so she drove back down to Chicago, and Nina, my daughter who lives in Amsterdam, was with us for a week, and then we drove her down to Santa Fe to visit her Nana for a week. So that was our first road trip, was down to Santa Fe. We also saw my husband's aunt and uncle who lived down there. So that was a lot of family. Also for Labor Day, my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, and his family were in town, so we got to see them. So it was a lot of family in a short amount of time. When we were down in Santa Fe, my daughter Nina, who is a knitter, and I went to a yarn shop that we really like, and we were in search of some notions for my other daughter and her girlfriend, who are brand new knitters. And I told that story last time. Couldn't find any notions there that were what I was specifically looking for. But one of the things that we did find, this is a yarn shop that has 2 floors. I'll put the name of the shop on the screen. I can't remember it for sure. I want to say it's called Looking Glass, but that may or may not be anywhere near what the name of the shop is in Santa Fe. But upstairs they have books. I think that's where they have their classroom. They had spinning fibers. And I got this Malabrigo NUBE, it's called, and it's merino. I don't usually knit or spin with merino. I prefer other types of wools, but my daughter does knit with merino. In fact, she often knits with Malabrigo. And this is a perfect color for her. She's got that really dark hair and pale skin and really dark eyes. And so this is a color that looks incredible on her. So I asked her if she'd want me to spin her some yarn, and she said yes. And I asked her what yarn weight. She's like, she likes like a DK weight or a worsted weight. She doesn't really want anything thinner than that. Which might prove to be a challenge for me, because I think with fine fibers, I tend to naturally just spin them fine, the singles, which would mean I'd have to spin a lot of very thin singles and then ply a bunch of them together. So I'm hoping that I can do a 2-ply, but it might end up being a 3-ply. Certainly don't want to do a 4-ply. So that I'm going to get started on this fall. This summer, I was dealing with this frozen shoulder, and it's still not 100%, but it's way better. I finished up physical therapy yesterday, and I got the functionality back that I wanted. I can wash under my arm. I can take my shirt off. I can reach behind my back. I can reach in this way and pull something out without it killing me. So There isn't much pain, but there's still some stiffness. But it was that combination of pain and stiffness that was making it difficult for me to spin. So now that it's cooler weather and I'm really wanting to do a lot of knitting related or fiber related things, I'm going to get started on spinning this. In the last Casual Friday, 2 weeks ago, I was trying to decide between which of 3 sweater patterns I wanted to knit. I really like all 3 of them. I will knit all 3 of them at some point. I was just trying to decide which one I wanted to get started on. What I wanted to do was use the yarn from this sweater. All the pieces were knit on this sweater. I had 3 sleeves, the body and 3 sleeves, and it was originally for a sweater and for a friend of mine who I haven't seen in more than 10 years probably, and I really wanted to use this yarn for something. So I was trying to decide between re-knitting this sweater but in a size that would fit me, because not wanting to try to figure out how to cut it down in order to make it fit me. So either re-knitting this with some slight differences, with a zipper instead of having it be buttoned. And I talked about maybe doing a hood, but I think when I do redo this sweater, I'm going to do it so that I have a very long neck, so the zipper will come all the way up and it can fold down into a turtleneck. But if it's unzipped, then it would be folded over but open. I think that's what I would do if I was going to reknit this. The other 2 choices were a sweater called Oakledge, which I was kind of leaning toward for a couple of reasons. One is that it has cables, but not tons and tons of cables. So that would be for an interesting texture pattern that I hadn't seen before. And it has some construction details I really liked. An unusual collar, and the 2 cables run up around the neck and then meet at the back of the neck. And I thought that was really interesting as well. And then the third one is called Drift. And it is, a lot of people thought I should go with this one because I was like very happy and animated and seemed excited about this one. And I am. It's just that it seemed like a combination of the 2 previous sweaters I just knit, and I kind of wanted to go a different direction. Drift is the feminized cardigan version of a men's sweater that has been in my queue for over 10 years. So I've always loved this sweater, and seeing that there was a woman's version of it that had some waist shaping and things like that, I was like, oh, I really want to do this. No cables in it, it's all texture, and I kind of really wanted to do some cables. So I did choose to do Oakledge, and after I uploaded the Casual Friday, it was time to go to our guild's annual weekend event called Yarnover. And that is a combination of classes. We get national teachers in from all over to teach classes. We have a marketplace that's open to the public, doesn't cost anything to like get an entry ticket like some fiber festivals do. And then there were a number of social opportunities during the summer for Friday night and Saturday night. And then the weekend ended on Sunday with our guild's monthly meeting. Normally it's on a Tuesday, but for the month of Yarnover, we always move it to that Sunday, so when people are staying in the hotel, they can go to that event. And it used to be the only guild meeting that a lot of people could attend because they live out of state, or in what we call in Minnesota the outstate area, which means outside of the metro area. But since the pandemic, we've been doing our monthly programs by Zoom. And so that allows people from all over. We've got members in Canada who can attend our monthly meetings, or people who are in rural areas or maybe aren't as mobile, can't get to the meetings on a Tuesday night near the university where traffic is busy. So we have more people attending our meetings now, but they're not in person. Instead, we have a lot of other social opportunities for the guild members. But this is the one meeting per year when we are live, and that is because it's the post-state fair meeting. So people who have entered their knitted items into the state fair, they can bring them, they can show them, we can see them up close, they can say what the judges' comments were, whether or not they got a ribbon. And in the past couple of years, we've opened it up. It's not just people who entered the state fair. It's if you entered a county fair, or if you came from out of state and you entered a fair in another state, you could bring that too. And this year they even said anything that was fair worthy, maybe you didn't enter it into a fair, but it's fair worthy in your opinion, you could also share that. So it's a really great, like, huge show and tell. And then all the sweaters and garments, and you know, whether they're mittens or socks or shawls, whatever they are, they're all laid out on the tables, and you can go look at them up close and see what they look like on the inside and all that kind of thing. So it's a really fantastic weekend. Now, I am not much of a shopper or a stasher, and I've actually, because I've kind of grown the amount of room in this office that it has sewing machines, I have less room to store yarn. So I'm really careful about the yarn that I do buy, and I want to plan. I don't want to just go buy impulsively, because that never works out. I sometimes fall in love with yarn, don't know what I would use it for, buy it, never figure out what I'm going to use it for, and then I end up donating it later. So when I go to the Yarnover marketplace, I always have a plan. And my plan this year was to get buttons for the sweater that I was about to knit, and to get a t-shirt. There was a vendor last year that had these t-shirts with sheep on it. One of them said sheep wreck. It was like all splat out. And the other one was lay flat to dry, with the sheep laying out flat. So I wanted to see if she had any new designs and maybe get a t-shirt. So that was my plan, buttons and a t-shirt. But you always have to be open for surprises and change of plans. So there were a few surprises that weekend. The first thing I want to do, Friday night was like the socializing. We had a dinner, and we could just sit around and see people and talk to them. And there were little stations you could see a demonstration of spinning. There was somebody who was helping you take measurements of your body, so that, and which is I did, because there are certain measurements I just have trouble getting. And so they filled out the little form for me of my different measurements. So that was great. But mostly it was just seeing people and being able to chat with them, have a glass of wine, something like that. But I was swatching for the sweater, and I had in my head that maybe I probably wanted to do the Oakledge sweater. So I started swatching for that. The next day, I wasn't staying at the hotel. I don't live that far of a drive away, so I would just come in every day. I came in on Saturday, and I saw a friend of mine in the lobby knitting, and asked him if he had been through the marketplace and what he'd gotten. And he was saying he had gone through and he hadn't made any decisions about yarn yet. He was looking for some yarn. He's going to have to go through again and pick out the yarn. But he had bought a tote bag. And I said, oh my gosh, I have so many tote bags. I don't think I will ever need another tote bag again. In fact, I need to donate some of the ones that I have, because for years I would go to an annual writers conference and you get a tote bag every time. And there were years when Yarnover, when you came in and you were taking classes, you got a tote bag. So I just have tons of them. And I thought, oh, that's good. But he's a newer knitter. He probably needs tote bag. That was fine. So I went through the marketplace. There were two rooms. The first room had some yarn, but it was mostly things that weren't yarn. So a lot of tote bags and notion bags, tools, other products that knitters might use, that kind of thing. And so, I just kind of walked through and I was looking, but I wasn't really looking for that. I was looking for my t-shirt and I was looking for buttons. And neither one of those were in that first room. So then I went to the other room, and right away I found the t-shirt vendor, and she, offered to help me find something. And I told her which shirts I already had. I was looking for something new. This is the one that she got. It's got sheep plus yarn plus wine equals frog. and it's all wrinkled because I had to pull this out of the dirty laundry because I've already been wearing it. The person who does this is called Knit Ba Pearl. I'll show you on there, Knit Ba Pearl. I assume she's got a website or Etsy shop or something like that, but I just love those shirts because in summertime I can't wear sweaters, so I like to wear something that's knit related on there. The next thing I found was the vintage button seller. So this is somebody who's a member of the Minnesota Button Society. They collect and trade vintage and antique buttons. And there are a number of shops in the area, either yarn shops or fabric stores, that different people who are members of this button society sell buttons on consignment. And one of the things I love about this button vendor is that her next door neighbor or her neighbor is a friend of mine, old friend of mine from when I was in this local writers group. And she's also a knitter, and she helps her neighbor out at vending at this Yarnover event. So I always look forward to going to the booth to see my friend Amy. Usually I'm looking for buttons. So I had my little swatch that was knit with this green yarn. And I got these buttons right here. These are attached with little twist ties, which means it makes it really easy to pull them off to kind of try. So they're really interesting buttons. They're not too, what do I want to say? There are some beautiful ones that were really white. It was like too much contrast. And then if you go too dark, then you can't see the buttons. And I just love these. They're just interesting. They have an interesting surface. And they're plastic. There's nothing, it's like $7 for these. I was so surprised because usually like the vintage buttons can be really expensive, but these aren't too expensive at all. So I love them, saw those. Then I did walk by a vendor. She's like a dyer who's in, I think it's Hastings. It's called Muse 230. Is that? Muse 2320 Fiber Company. So she's got a little space down there, and she always has a booth. And I saw this yarn last year. I think it was a new color for them, but they didn't have it in the yarn weight I was looking for because I was looking for yarn last year for my Dutch Nights shirt. I loved this color, but they didn't have it in fingering weight. And when I went by again this year, I saw the yarn again, and it's a DK weight, and I thought, you know, my husband might like this for a hat. And I brought it home, and he's like, yeah, I do like that. And it's kind of, it's called Weaver Bird Donegal DK. So it's a Donegal tweed. It's got little flecks in it. I'll insert a picture where you can see better what it is. And the color is called Octopus Ink. So it's kind of black, but kind of a purpley black. And it's just tonal, and I just think it'll be really interesting to knit with. Michael always picks out his own hat patterns. I make him a hat usually about every other year. And he'll go on Ravelry and he'll pick out something really interesting. It's usually something that I haven't seen before, has an interesting technique, so it makes it fun for me. So that was a little surprise that I happened to see that and go, oh, I remember this from last year, and I wanted that yarn color, but I couldn't get it for anything that I wanted. So this would be great. So later on Saturday, I was talking to a couple of friends of mine about what they had bought at the marketplace. And two of them started talking about this vendor and her tote bags. One of the friends had bought her tote bags, I think one or two of them even, and the other friend had ordered one. She said she pre-ordered one. I'm like, what do you mean you pre-ordered it? She was like, well, she's got all the fabrics there and you can just pick it out. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I'm like, well, what's so great about, these tote bags? Because they were just raving about them. They're like, oh, well, they're stiff enough to stand up on their own, and they have all these different pockets, and then they have this drawstring at the top. And as soon as they said that, I imagined that it must be like my bike basket. So I have a Dutch bike. It's called an Oma Fiets or a grandma bike. It's like your basic black Dutch bike. When we got it, I also bought this bike basket, and it sits perpendicularly on the rear rack behind the seat. It clamps on, you can take it off, and take this into the grocery store. So like if I go to the co-op or something, it's exactly the same size as a shopping bag. And then when I come back and it's full of groceries, I can flip this outer part up over the top of everything like this, and so nothing bounces out and it stays protected. And so this is what I was imagining that tote bag must be like. And so I went back to the marketplace, that first room where I just kind of walked through. I'm like, yeah, bags, 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 and tools, whatever. I don't need any of that. And I went over and I looked at them, and sure enough, it's that kind of a thing. I'll put a picture on the screen from her website. She's called Stellar Notions, I think is the name of it. And so she's got different sizes of these, but she's got backpacks, she's got all kinds of things. But I saw that, and I saw the drawing. I'm like, I want it, and I didn't really care for it. They're nice color combinations. They're just not the ones that I would choose for me. And she's like, well, you can pre-order them, and you can pick out the fabrics that you want. So you have your main canvas solid color, and then you have your contrast fabric for the pockets and stuff, and then there's a lining color. She said, well, I would pick that out. There might be enough of this fabric that you've chose to do the lining, but if not, I'd pick something that coordinated, and I would pick all of the zippers and all of that stuff to coordinate. I would pick those out for you. She sources a lot of these things from I don't know if it's dead stock or whatever. So a lot of times she's got a limited amount of it. It's not like she can just order more and more of it. What she has is what she has. And so I ordered, I think I'll get it by the end of the month sometime. So much for me not needing another tote bag. And because I was pre-ordering, I had to fill out my name on this form. And sure enough, at the top of the sheet was my friend Steve, who had been telling me about how he bought a tote bag earlier in the day. And I was like, I don't need another tote bag. So after 3 friends told me about this tote bag, I had to go see it, and couldn't have been more surprised and delighted at what I found. On Sunday, that was the day of the guild meeting. Again, it was state fair things, but could be county fair or just fair worthy. And so I wore this sweater and modeled it. This is a sweater I made last winter. It's called Royale by Glenna. It's something that had been in my queue for more than a decade. I'd been wanting to knit this sweater. And when I knit it, I thought, maybe I'll enter the fair again this summer. I haven't entered in more than 10 years. This seems like a sweater that would be good for the fair. And then because I hadn't entered the fair in so long, by the time summer came around and it was time to do entries, it was super hot. I was never looking at my sweaters, totally forgot about it. So I didn't enter. But I did get to show off this sweater at the meeting. Now they had a table there for giveaway patterns. I think it was Threads magazine might have donated them, and so there were a lot of them were probably old patterns. And I looked through. Last year I got a couple of great patterns for kids sweaters that I made for my nephew, grandnephew, and grandniece. So I was looking through to see if there's anything. Didn't see anything. So I sat down, and then pretty soon someone came over. I know her, she's a spinner, I know her from the Weavers Guild spinning group. She came over and she said, oh, I saw this pattern and I thought this looked like something you would knit. And she showed it to me and I'm like, that is absolutely something that I would knit. So it's this sweater right here. So first of all, color, which yeah, you can make a sweater in any color you want. Cardigan, that's number 2. V-neck shawl collar, number 3. Cables and texture, number 4. And it's got this interesting front that comes down. It's kind of asymmetrical, which is something that I really like. I love it. And I'm like, this has to have been printed and published a long time ago. It was 2006. There's nothing from the past 10 years hardly that I ever want to knit. Which either says that my style is dated or I just don't like the current trends, which is true. I don't tend to like the oversized, top-down, seamless. I just don't like that. I like things that are more interesting to knit and that I think will look good on me. But most of all, they have to be interesting to knit. And a lot of the top-down stockinette stuff that's oversized is just not my thing. So now I have a 4th sweater that I'm going to want to try knitting. I think this is called, I did look for this on Ravelry to see if it was even on there. There's a vest version that's on there. And I did Google, and she's got a website. She's still selling this pattern. It's not clear if you get it digitally or if it's a physical pattern, if it's been updated. There's just no information, and it's very expensive. It's an Australian. It's really expensive for a pattern. It's like 25 or 30 Australian dollars, something like that. And you could get it in a kit form with all of the yarn. I don't know why it's so expensive, but I got it for free. So you might, if this is something you're interested in, you might want to see if you can get a used copy somewhere. So as I mentioned, I did choose to do the Oakledge sweater. So I decided to start with one of the fronts for a couple of reasons. One is that as I was knitting it, I could confirm that my gauge was actually accurate, and I could get used to the stitch patterns, and it's just a smaller piece. So if I would have to rip everything out and start over, I'd only have to rip out a narrow thing rather than starting with the back, which is a lot wider. So I finished the left front right before we went on our second road trip of the month, which was to go to Wichita, Kansas. So my dad died a year ago, and he was buried, he was cremated, and he was buried with his second wife, my stepmother, who died when I was in college. Because it was paid for, and it was nearby where his third wife of 40 years lived. And she was not super healthy, and so she thought, might as well bury him there, and then I can go visit him. Well, then she died a couple of months later, and she was buried in her family plot, again, all paid for, but in Augusta, which is just outside of Wichita. Her son had talked to her before she died, and he was like, do you want Bill to be moved to be with you, after, later? And she said yes. So we worked for 9 months to try to get the paperwork, and then to get the right paperwork to make all of this happen. We were going to do this last spring. That came and went. Then the summer, that came and went. And finally, we really put the arm on them, and we got the paperwork done. And so my brother drove from Michigan to Wichita with his wife, and my husband and I drove down from Minneapolis. We spent the weekend there. Her son had the task of having to clear out their very, very full house, as well as the 3 storage units that they had. So that was up to him to do that. There wasn't a whole lot that we were even looking for from our dad. There wasn't like stuff that we wanted necessarily that we could think of. Her son, had everything down to this one storage unit that had my dad's stuff in it. And so we went through it on Saturday. One of the first things that was handed to me was the original marriage certificate of my great-grandparents, so my dad's maternal grandmother. It's in pieces, and it was like between 2 pieces of saran wrap to keep it from, falling apart further. And I was like, I do genealogy, and this was like a huge thrill for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have physical objects from this particular line, and only really that particular line. I do have my mom's knitting like tools and stuff. I got those, and her knitting patterns and sewing books and things like that. I do, and my grandma's sewing box. So I have things from that grandmother. And I have things from my father's mother. But now I have something from her mother, but I also have something that I had gotten before from her mother. So I have my great-great-grandmother, great-grandmother, grandmother, and father. I've got that whole line. I'm going to get that marriage certificate restored. So I already had all the information from there. I have lots of photocopies and from microfilm and stuff of marriage licenses, all kinds of those kind of vital records. But this is the only one where I have the original physical one that the couple was given on their wedding date. And so that was amazing. I was happy just with that. And then we got to the storage unit, and my dad was a math professor for more than 50 years at Wichita State University. He taught more than 200 different math courses. Some semesters he'd be teaching 3 different sections of the same exact calculus class, but other times he'd be teaching the history of mathematics. He had different history of math classes. He had all kinds of things that he taught, more than 200 different courses. And he was the longest serving faculty member that the university has ever had. And I think all of the materials that were used to teach every one of those classes was in this storage locker. So we had to go through and just say, okay, these are all just notes or whatever for classes. We don't need to keep these. But there were some things that there were objects from his office, small things that either I wanted or my brother wanted. And so we were able to take those. There are a lot of photographs that we had to go through back at the hotel. But I otherwise got a few different things. Now, one thing I didn't think I would get back is the sweater that I knit for my dad years ago, when I was probably in the first couple of years I was a knitter, because the house had a bed bug infestation when they died. And all of the soft goods, they had to fumigate and get rid of all of the soft goods in the house. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to get that sweater back. And I got it back. And it's because it had been stored in a part of the house that was separate. And not only did I get that sweater back, it's this one right here. Surprise, surprise. It's a shawl collar, simple stockinette. It's got a stripe on the back. When we came to his retirement party, I don't know, 11 years ago, he showed it to me. I'd forgotten all about it. And he said he kept it hanging on his desk chair. So when he was down in the basement on the computer, if he got cold, he could wear it. So I got this one back, but then there was another one. There was this Icelandic sweater, cardigan again with the yoke, again in blues. My dad had blue eyes, so he always liked blue. And my brother is just as big as my dad, 6'3", big guy. And so I gave that other one to my brother. And it explains, I don't own an Icelandic sweater for myself, but I have a lot of Icelandic sweater books. And I know that I knit one for my mother at one point that she had lined so she could wear it as a jacket. I made one for my niece when she was little, but I hadn't remembered that I'd knit one for my dad. But it makes sense considering how many books of Icelandic sweaters that I own, and yet I don't have an Icelandic sweater myself. So that was really wonderful to get that sweater back. He also had written a few math books, so we got copies of those. He had several slide rules, so I got one of his slide rules that he kept in his office. Of course, he didn't use them anymore, but he had them. He certainly knew how to use them. We pulled this out of a box, and it took a while for me to figure it out. There's these little pins that you pull out like this, and then you can open this up, and it's a compass set. So he taught, a lot of geometry, different kinds of geometry. Turns out he had a lot of other compasses. There were plenty of compasses. My brother got a set as well. This is the kind of thing that I tend to treasure. These smaller personal items are the things that I'm really happy to get. And so we went through all the photographs. We saw that a bunch of them were from my stepmother's family. So we had family friends also in the math department. And my stepmother was the sister of one of the other of the mom in another family. And their kids, that's who we saw when we went to visit my dad. They were our cousins. They were step cousins, but we both thought of each other as our only real cousins because we never saw our biological cousins. They didn't see theirs. We didn't see ours. So I found a lot of pictures of their grandparents, of my stepmother, of them as they were growing up. And we met them for dinner on Sunday, handed the pictures up. It was so great to see them after so many years. And to see their pleasure at going through all of those photographs as well. That was my September. It was a lot. So I want to go to the overhead and show you a little bit about this Oakledge sweater and some of the details that made me choose this particular one that I'm finding really interesting. First, I want to talk a little bit about how I am reusing the yarn from this old sweater. First of all, I originally had 20 of these 50-gram skeins of this yarn, and I think I used 15 of them in the original sweater, so I still had 5 left. So rather than unwinding everything to knit with, I started by using these, and that was really handy for especially the road trip, just being able to have, you know, pre-wound yarn available. I mentioned that there were 3 sleeves to this sweater. For one of the sleeves, I knitted the cuff too short, and then the main body of the sleeves, in order for them to end at the same place, one of the sweaters was too short. And I was going to try to graft some new on. Yeah, it was just like, I am not going to try to make this work. And I think knitting it down wouldn't have been possible because of the way that the cables grow out of the ribbing. So I couldn't have cut it off and knit down because there would have been an offset. So I thought it's just going to be easier for me to knit a 3rd sleeve than it is to try to graft that ribbing. That was my mind frame at the time. So I'm on the last one of these pre-made ones. So I have undone 2 of the sleeves so far. And I've got 200-gram skeins back from that. Each one of the sleeves is almost exactly 100 grams. Let me show you with the 3rd sleeve how I've been doing this. Okay, so you get the bind off started, and because it's a little sticky on the chain, so I get it going a little bit. Then take my nitty knotty, which is something that spinners use when they are winding off their singles from the bobbin and into a skein. So I start winding it off like this, and then I just do this. So it's unwinding, oops. So that's how I do this. And then because it's been sitting for 10 years, and it's been washed and blocked, it's like ramen. So after I get it into, this is a 2-yard nitty knotty, so the loop is 2 yards this way. I hang it from something, and then I take my steamer and I just steam it. You could soak it in water, or in warm water, or you could boil a pot of water and have like a cake rack or something over it, and then have the skein lay on top of that and just rotate it around. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can just knit it right from the old thing, and it will look all lumpy as you're knitting it, but once you wash that finished thing, those come out. But I always feel paranoid that somehow my gauge is going to be messed up. If I do that, it isn't, but it feels like that. And so I just feel better if the yarn is at a more normal state when I am getting ready to knit from it. So that's how I wind off the yarn as it's coming out of the thing that I no longer want. So one of the important things to understand about this sweater is that the button bands are being knit at the same time as the front is being knit. So I started with the left front, and then when I was in the car, I was going to start the right front, and I realized I was going to need to do the buttonholes. And I just was like looking at where they were supposed to be placed, and I thought the first one was supposed to be placed really far up from the edge, like, you know, maybe this far up. And then there were only supposed to be 5 buttonholes. I didn't think that was enough. I was looking at pictures of people who had actually made it. You know, the pattern photo is on a mannequin, and so it's hanging nice and straight. But when it's on human bodies that maybe have lumps and bumps in different places or are moving, those buttonholes just seem to be too far apart. There was a lot of this, you know, and because this is a knit one, purl one that's knit in this direction, it's really easy for this to, you know, pull out, and you end up with, you know, those scalloped look. And so I wanted to make sure that they were closer together And I've also ordered some teal grosgrain ribbon that I can sew onto the back of it to help prevent that horizontal stretch. The buttons that I got, these buttons are very lightweight, so I don't need to worry about vertical stretch from the weight of the buttons, but I do need to worry about this horizontal stretch because of the Knit One Pro One ribbing and the spacing. So you see all of these markers on here. The orange ones are the original spacing. So you can see how far up that first one was, and then they were about 3 inches apart after that. And I wanted something that was about 2 inches apart. So I'm going to take these orange markers out. This just seems like a better spacing. Here's the bottom. So the bottom one will be down here nearer to the bottom so that it can stay closed. Now, the argument for having it up further is that if you needed, maybe you wanted the bottom ones unbuttoned because you wanted room for hips or whatever, that's valid. But I really wanted these to be spaced differently. I do like an odd number of buttons. When I did my big bulky sweater that only had 4 buttonholes, somebody said, oh, I think you should have done 5. I like an odd number. I like an odd number too, but it for the size of those buttons and the amount of room that there was for those large buttons, 4 was what was going to work. So instead of 5, I'm going to have 7, and I've done the buttonholes here. So I had to plan all that out ahead of time before I knit this, because if I changed my mind, if I'd done it the way the pattern had said and then I changed my mind, I could have done some surgery and some sewing up to close holes and redo other holes, but that's a big pain in the butt. Or I would have had to rip out the whole thing and re-knit it, which bigger pain. So pre-planning was what I wanted to do. Now, so here we get up at the top, and you'll see how this cable is going this way. The way that that's done is you do an increase here and a decrease over here so that you're maintaining your stitch count, but it's causing this to get narrower and this to get wider. And so as you increase, you incorporate those new stitches into the ribbing pattern, and then you get this which ends up opening up as a V-neck, so that the front opening will be kind of open like this. At the top, there's short row shoulder shaping. The ribbing is kept on a holder, and then the cable continues to be worked. And the way this is it's a 6-stitch cable with a purl stitch on either side, so that's 8. And so what they have you do is cast on a stitch at the beginning and end so that you have 10 stitches. And that's going to allow you to sew this edge to the back of the neck. So these two will come around at the back of the neck and meet each other. So they'll form the back of the neck. So these cross in opposite directions, so you'll kind of get this curve like this at the back of the neck. And then when that is done, this edge will be sewn to the bound off edge of the back of the neck. And then the ribbing will be put back onto needles. You'll work across here, and then you pick up stitches along here, along that horizontal edge, and then go across the ribbing. And then you can continue to knit the collar going upwards. So that's how you get that effect. So it's really an interesting construction, and I am enjoying it very much. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.